In the autumn of 1888, something evil stalked the fog-shrouded streets of London's East End. A predator so cunning, so brutal, that his very name still sends chills down our spines more than a century later. He killed at least 5 women, mutilated their bodies with surgical precision, taunted the police with cryptic letters, and then he vanished into the shadows like a ghost. Who was Jack the Ripper? And why, after 135 years, does his identity remain one of history's most terrifying mysteries? Tonight, we descend into the darkness of Victorian London to uncover the truth behind the world's most notorious serial killer. To understand Jack the Ripper, you must first understand the hellscape that was Whitechapel in 1888. Picture London's East End, a maze of narrow cobblestone alleyways perpetually shrouded in thick, acrid fog. Gas lamps flickered weakly against the darkness, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. The air reeked of human waste, rotting garbage, and industrial smoke that burned your lungs with every breath. This was the forgotten corner of the world's most powerful empire. While Queen Victoria's Britain ruled the seas here in Whitechapel, over 900,000 people were crammed into just 4 square miles of urban decay. Unemployment was rampant. Disease was everywhere. Hope was a luxury few could afford. Women, desperate, destitute women, walked these streets at night, selling their bodies for pennies just to survive another day. They had names: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. But to most of society, they were invisible, forgotten, expendable. The police barely patrolled these streets. When they did, they moved in pairs, their footsteps echoing ominously off the brick walls. Even they were afraid. It was into this world of shadows and desperation that Jack the Ripper emerged. A predator who understood that in Whitechapel, screams went unheard and the dead could disappear without anyone caring. Until the killing started. August 31st, 1888. Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old woman, was found lying in the gutter, her throat slashed so deeply it nearly severed her head. But that wasn't all. The killer had made deliberate, methodical cuts to her abdomen. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was something far more sinister. The police initially dismissed it as another violent robbery gone wrong. They had no idea they were staring at the work of a monster. 8 days later, Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The scene was horrific beyond imagination. Her throat had been cut with the same brutal efficiency, but this time the killer had gone further, much further. Organs had been removed with what doctors described as anatomical knowledge. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Panic began to ripple through the East End. Then came the night that changed everything. September 30th, 1888. The double event. Within the span of just 1 hour, Jack the Ripper claimed 2 more victims. Elizabeth Stride was found with her throat cut in Dutfield's yard. But here's the chilling part. Something had interrupted the killer. Perhaps a passerby, perhaps a sound. He hadn't finished his gruesome work. So he found another victim. 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. This time, the Ripper had completed his horrific ritual. The mutilation was beyond description. A piece of her apron was found with a cryptic message chalked on a nearby wall. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The police erased the message before dawn, fearing it would incite anti-Semitic riots. But the damage was done. Jack the Ripper wasn't just a killer, he was playing mind games. The final canonical murder occurred on November 9th in Miller's Court. Mary Jane Kelly, just 25 years old, was found in her own room. What the Ripper did to her in the privacy of that small space, it defied human comprehension. The crime scene photographs were so disturbing that they weren't released to the public for decades. 5 women, 5 brutal murders, each one more calculated and sadistic than the last. But who was doing this, and why? The Metropolitan Police were in chaos. Inspector Frederick Aberline, a seasoned detective with 25 years of experience, was assigned to lead the investigation. He'd seen every kind of violence the city could produce, but this was different. The Ripper seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of Whitechapel's labyrinthine streets. He struck with surgical precision, then melted into the fog like he'd never existed. No witnesses who could provide reliable descriptions. No clear motive beyond pure evil. Desperation led to drastic measures. Police flooded the streets in plain clothes. They interrogated hundreds of suspects. They even enlisted the help of bloodhounds, though the dogs proved useless in the maze of scents that filled the East End. But the killer wasn't finished playing games. On September 27th, the Central News Agency received a letter written in red ink, signed Jack the Ripper. For the first time, the monster had given himself a name. The letter was filled with taunting, gleeful descriptions of the murders and promised more to come. Then came the From Hell letter delivered to George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside the package was half of a human kidney, allegedly taken from Catherine Eddowes. The accompanying note was brief but bone-chilling. I fried and ate the other half. The press went into a frenzy. Newspaper headlines screamed warnings about the Whitechapel fiend. Vigilante groups formed. Panic gripped not just the East End, but all of London. Women stopped walking alone after dark. Businesses closed early. The very fabric of society seemed to be unraveling under the weight of fear. And yet, despite the massive manhunt, despite the hundreds of tips and thousands of man-hours invested, Jack the Ripper remained a ghost. The investigation would become one of the most frustrating failures in criminal history. How does someone commit such horrific crimes in one of the world's most populous cities and simply vanish? Over 135 years, investigators, historians, and amateur detectives have proposed more than 100 suspects, each theory more intriguing than the last. Was Jack the Ripper a medical professional? The precision of his cuts, the surgical removal of organs, it suggested someone with anatomical knowledge. Perhaps a doctor who'd lost his mind, or a medical student driven to madness by the horrors he'd witnessed in Victorian hospitals. Could he have been an aristocrat? Some theories point to Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, though most historians dismiss this as pure speculation. The idea of a royal killer, however, captures our imagination. What if the monster came not from the gutters of Whitechapel, but from the palaces of power? Then there's the foreign suspect theory. Anti-immigrant sentiment ran high in Victorian London. Many believed the killer had to be an outsider, perhaps a Polish immigrant, a Jewish slaughterman, or even an American doctor fleeing his own crimes. One of the most compelling suspects is Montague John Druitt, a barrister and part-time teacher who committed suicide shortly after the final murder. His own family apparently suspected him of being the Ripper. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who was eventually committed to an asylum, remains a favorite among modern investigators. DNA evidence from 2019 seemed to point in his direction, though the findings remain controversial. But here's the terrifying possibility that keeps criminologists awake at night. What if Jack the Ripper wasn't special at all? What if he was just an ordinary man who understood that in the chaos and indifference of Victorian London's East End, he could kill with impunity? What if the most frightening thing about Jack the Ripper isn't who he was, but how easily he got away with it? More than a century has passed since Jack the Ripper's blade last tasted blood on the streets of Whitechapel. The gas lamps have been replaced by electric lights. The slums have been torn down and rebuilt. The women he killed have been reduced to footnotes in history books. But his shadow still falls across our collective consciousness. Perhaps that's his true victory, not just the 5 lives he took, but the fear he planted in our hearts. The questions that will never be answered. The case that will never truly be closed. In the end, Jack the Ripper achieved a kind of immortality that his victims were denied. He became legend, he became myth. He became the monster that proves that sometimes evil wins simply by remaining invisible. So I ask you, do you think Jack the Ripper was a criminal mastermind who carefully orchestrated his reign of terror? Or just a shadow lost in history, whose greatest weapon was the darkness itself? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed diving into history's darkest mysteries, make sure to subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles for more stories that will keep you awake at night.